Hey there, welcome to the channel. So today I want to talk a little bit about the craziness going on in Sri Lanka. All right, so what happens when you have a situation where the US dollar is spiking and going through the roof, as we see here, and you have a situation where commodity prices have been going through the roof, as you see over here, contributed by, they were already rising well before the Ukraine situation. That wasn't till over here in February. It was already rising a lot, and then it just spiked up after that. And then in addition, you have a spike in food prices. And in addition, noting that, the food prices were already going up before the war, right here, see, and food prices were already going up before that time. Well, what happens? What do you get? Well, you get Sri Lanka protests. So here we go. We have a party at the prime minister's house. Oh my gosh. Okay, so what's apparently happening here is that we have people, protesters stormed the president's residence. You can see that they're having a good old time swimming in the pool here. There's been lots of protests going on in Sri Lanka. Here we have, wow, people are packed into the president's residence there, taking selfies and everything. Okay, very good. People all over hanging out in the yards. Looks really good, swimming in the pool, having a good old time. Man, but just what's going on? So, in short, the thing that's happening in Sri Lanka is that we're right over here. They say is suffering the worst financial crisis in recent history, leaving millions struggling to buy food, medicine, and fuel. Now, why would that be? Why would that be? So, the issue that these countries have is that they don't have the world reserve currency. Okay. So, they don't have the dollar. So, for them to get fuel, for example, and then for them to get things that they need in the international market, they have to get dollars. They have to get dollars generally to buy that. If we see, as over here, that the dollar is spiking, keeping in mind that the dollar has gone all the way from recently 24.50 here on this UU up all the way to 28. This is really big moves. And also, this is at a high that we haven't had since the cerveza sickness, but also going back in time, it's a high we haven't seen for at least a decade. So what happens is, this appears to be, Brent Johnson's dollar milkshake theory just in action. And the problem that you have, if you're a country and you have whatever currency and you don't have dollars and you need to get things to import, for example, oil, you need to get food. So you got your oil. So your oil is spiking, the price of it in dollars. But on top of that, you struggle to even get the dollars to buy the oil that you could get your hands on. Then same thing with food. You're struggling to get dollars to get the food that you need. So now you really get to this point where literally people are starving. And what do you get when people are starving? You get protests. They become violent protests because people have nothing to lose at that point. And we have now gotten to that point in Sri Lanka. Now, what's very interesting, we're talking about I believe it's the president or the prime minister and another person in the cabinet. They're talking about, okay, they're willing to, resign. So they're going to resign. But, it doesn't really resolve the issue. I mean, okay, put in the next group of people that have no way of dealing with this. It's not going to solve the issue. They have to find some way to get the oil that they need to run their economy, to get the food that they need to feed their people, and in an era where right now the dollar is very strong. So it's a very sad situation, not really good. It's rather amazing to see people just swimming in the pool and everything and all over, the residence of the prime minister / president. Pretty interesting to see. But what's happening is that we should expect more of this and much more of this. So it seems like there's been a lot of protests. There's been some people dying and some violence, but it hasn't seemed too crazy yet. But I think that we will see a lot more of this. Now, there's an element of the dollar's still going up, so that's not really good. We might be getting a little reprieve on the oil here. We did have the oil sell off. We had like a 10% sell off one of the days last week. So, maybe there's some inclination that some of this will go. The dollar copper has come off a lot. So maybe there's some indication. Now, on the wheat market, this is a positive that it came off from this high of 1200, down to 800. However, just, we have to do note that even just this is like a year and a half of data, and you're looking like, well, it's still really high. If we go back into 2020, wheat was $500, right? $500, whatever this is, right? So it's still at least almost 100% higher, literally almost 100% higher, maybe like 80% higher, something like that. So it's still very expensive. It's still a huge issue. And so there's a couple things, I guess, if you're in the US and you're aggravated with the high prices and stuff, yeah, it sucks and it's a pain in the butt. But, these other countries, they're going to go through some real serious issues. And I think things, when you look at like wheat and you look at this isn't really reflected. The price of this doesn't really reflect the parts of the world where they need to get a hold of that Ukrainian wheat, and it just can't get it right now. Everything's blockaded, and the parties are not really doing any kind of negotiation to kind of like get some of that wheat flowing. So it's really actually a very sad situation. I think at this point, one comment I'll make on that, there's all this talk about, well, a bunch of grain, which represents whatever their export, 10 to 15% of the world exported grain coming from Ukraine is stuck in Odessa. And the issue is twofold. Ukraine, of course, doesn't want to lose Odessa. And so they've mined the crap out of the port. So it'd be very difficult to get in there. They have to demine it. Same fold, Russia is blockading it. So both things are on. And we have no leadership anywhere in the world with anyone to just force the two parties to come up with some kind of agreement to get ships out of there with grain before it rots, get those ships to whatever countries would normally get those ships of grain, so that we could minimize the amount of Sri Lankas that we have. But we have Biden not competent, not even coherent. So he will not do anything because he has no idea. This is on a little bit bigger picture. This is one of the issues you have with sort of this. It's part of this woke kind of thing going on in the West. And there's many aspects to it. But one of the situations is you look at it and you say, a lot of these leaders, like, if you look especially how Biden talks about Russia, he's like, well, this is Putin's price hike and blaming him for everything, yet taking no responsibility for all the things that led up to it. And now, I'm not saying that this is how it is, but from the Russian perspective, you can clearly see that they feel like they've been bullied, right? They've had this expansion of NATO into countries that were part of their sphere of influence in the past. So you have that aspect. So from their perspective, they've been bullied and they're not going to take it anymore. So hence you have this invasion, right? And the West doesn't seem to acknowledge any culpability at all for any of this. And therefore, as such, they don't want to let the foot off the gas at all. They want the war to continue to make Russia suffer. However, the consequence of that is what? The consequence is you're going to have unrest in many countries like Sri Lanka, where the price of oil, the price of food, the price of oil, meaning the directly price of gasoline, price of food, gasoline, all that stuff goes together, right? If the price of gas and diesel is high, that makes food more expensive because you have to ship it. If you have grain not getting to countries because it's locked up in port, that's going to cause people starving. And when they get to that point, it's not good. So I think in summary, I would like to see, so I'll put my happy unicorn hat on. I would love to see like some leadership in the West to just negotiate with Russia and Zelensky and Biden, should lead it, be like, okay, let's find a way to get grain out of these port into these countries to ease the pressure on these countries. Once again, oil is part of it as well. However, it would help if people had some food. That would help. It's not a perfect solution, but we don't have that kind of leadership. And so what would you have to do? You'd have to say, well, okay, well, I'm going to negotiate with someone that maybe I feel is a bad actor, whatever. So I would look back to, Ronald Reagan, and I'd look back to the past where we had the SALT treaties and the SALT II treaties with the USSR at the time, which is, was dominated by Russia. And, these leaders, they found a way in the Cold War. And that was when we were in the real serious Cold War. We had bombers like ready to go. It's like they're just hanging out at the base, and like the red light goes off and they're hopping into B-52s and launching stuff. He had subs all over the place, and we were just on a razor's edge a big chunk of that time. Yet, in spite of that, they found a way to at least talk, come to some agreements, SALT II, reduce the amount of nuclear weapons. So that's what has been done in the past. So what's being done to do that now? What's being done to de-escalate from the West side of point of view? They're not doing anything. They're only escalating more. And whether Russia is right or wrong has nothing to do with it. You would say that Russia was wrong before when they made the SALT II treaty, but for better or worse, it made things maybe slightly safer. So because of this childishness of the leaders that are like, well, you're wrong, you're bad, so anything you do is wrong. So I'm just gonna, put my fingers in my ears and say, no, I'm not gonna deal with you. That's kind of what we have going on right now. And unfortunately, because of that, who's gonna suffer? Sri Lanka, and I would assume a host of other countries. This is not the last one, is what I would suspect. There's going to be a whole bunch of countries that are going to have unrest and stuff. And this one may be a little less violent, but some of the other ones, particularly parts of the Middle East and stuff, it's going to be much more violent. And it's going to be really sad to see. Because if you were looking ahead, if you were paying attention to what was going on, if you weren't in a freaking coma, you'd realize how bad the situation is, and you could start putting some pieces together to try to mitigate it, reduce the worst effects of everything that's going on. All right, that's it for this one. Bye.